Hey everyone, my name is Matt Hodgson and I'm co-founder of Outbreaker Solutions, and our company has developed an antimicrobial surface that's made from compressed sodium chloride, or also referred to as CSC in some of the medical literature. Now I'm here to talk about the field of infection prevention and more specifically antimicrobial surfaces. Now I want to first characterize the problem that we and many others are trying to address, and that is the spread of infections. Now the global pandemic of COVID-19 has shown how easily infections can be spread from person to person, and this is a problem that doesn't just apply to viruses, it applies to bacteria and it applies to fungus, and every year countless people are infected and many die from the spread of these infections. It's a massive problem, and governments and institutions around the world are working to solve the problem of antibiotic resistant bugs, which spread just as rapidly, and estimates have pegged this problem over the next generation to get close to 3% of total GDP just to treat. That's why we're focused on prevention. Treating these after the fact is very costly. It's going to be more sustainable to prevent these infections in the first place. So when it comes to antimicrobial surfaces, there are four major criteria that need to be met. The first has to do with speed. It needs to be fast. The second is accessible. You need to be able to access it and implement it easily. Third is safety. The solution needs to be safe and doesn't harm people. And lastly, it needs to be a passive solution. So I want to quickly talk about each of the four of these. So let's start with speed. Now, the current field of antimicrobial surfaces deals with bacterial reduction in a matter of hours, and we just don't think that's acceptable. Most people are passing on infections by touching the same surface. We know about 80% of infections are spread by our hands, and that happens when someone coughs or sneezes into their hands, touches a surface, and then you come along just 1 or 2 minutes later and you touch that surface, and because we're all bad at it, we touch our face, and then therefore we continue this vicious cycle. Therefore, a surface that just reduces this bacteria count very slowly over the course of 1, 2, 4, or 6 hours, maybe it helps a little bit, but it doesn't address the problem of these high hand traffic surfaces. The next problem has to do with accessibility. It doesn't matter how good your solution is if it can't be implemented easily and on a wide scale. So we deal with sodium chloride. It's regular salt. It's very accessible and quite inexpensive. This is compared to precious metals or nanotechnology, which is much more expensive and more difficult to get your hands on and implement on a much wider scale. The third point has to do with safety. As I mentioned, compressed sodium chloride is the only active ingredient in our antimicrobial product. Now, salt has been proven safe on every possible level. It's the same stuff you sprinkle on your French fries and use to season food just to the right level. This is in contrast to a lot of other surfaces that do use toxic substances in order to achieve that antimicrobial effect. We need something that is safe for people to touch and interact with on a daily basis. Now, the last point has to do with a solution being passive. Now, what I mean by this is you can have an antimicrobial solution that requires human intervention in order to succeed, because we know over the long run, these always fail. Research has shown over hundreds of years that it's very difficult to get people to change their behavior. Now, when it comes to surfaces, this is no different. We know that hand washing is the best way to prevent the spread of infections, and yet people just don't do it. Unfortunately, this applies to our healthcare institutions and doctors and nurses, and this isn't a function of them maliciously trying to spread infections. This just has to do with human nature. It has to do with resource and time constraints. Therefore, you can't have a solution that requires any extra training, any extra maintenance, or any other implementation that requires people to constantly be interacting with it in order for it to be effective. CSC can be implemented and it just sits there and it's effective over the course of minutes, hours, and days and years. So that's what we're all about with Outbreaker Solutions. We want to change the field for the better and show that you need to be fast, accessible, safe, and the solution needs to be passive. That's why we're all about compressed sodium chloride.